So we are here to discuss an important subject today, the CEO's role in corporate reputation. As reputation practitioners, we live in very exciting times. We're seeing a pace of change like never before, business complexity like never before, activism, intrusion, scrutiny like never before. And in this whole situation, reputation has emerged as a source of strategic advantage. It's a strategic asset, you might say, and also being recognized increasingly as a strategic risk, because it is the mother of all risks, because any business risk will finally lead to reputation risk. The central character in this plot is the chief executive. As the ambassador, as the chief spokesperson, as the visionary, as a person who has a responsibility for the strategy in an ever-changing scenario, he plays a very important role in corporate reputation. I have a very eminent panel, and I don't think you could get a more distinguished panel like this to discuss this subject. On my left is Herbert Heitmann, Dr. Herbert Heitmann of Bayer. He has been playing a global communications role with multiple organizations. In the past, he has been an advisor to the German Parliament. He has worked with SAP, and is now at Bayer. Mr. Pierre Goad is the global co-head of communications at HSBC. He has been an editor at Wall Street Journal earlier. He has worked with the Zurich Insurance Corporation as the global head of communications. And at the far end, Olga, I'll have to refer to your name again. Olga?
Podoinitsyna. It's okay.
She's the member of board and global head of communications and marketing at VTB Capital. It's a significant or large Russian investment bank with operations in many parts of the world. Earlier, she has served at Deutsche Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and started life at Burson Marsteller. Olga has a brief presentation to make, and after she has finished the presentation, we'll get into a conversation. Olga, would you like to start?
For the slides?
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this special mission to start. And I'm sure we all agree that CEO is the real task force for both strategic communications and development of corporate reputation. Nevertheless, may I ask you a question? Have you ever tried to figure out CEO share in company media presence? Thank you. I did it too when I was preparing for our meeting today. And my guess was it is 40–45%. The focus group I involved said the same. But I was surprised by results. It is 4–4. If you look in investment banking area, it is upper side of the slide. Okay, I have checked other selected industries, and numbers were different, but the same rate if you look at the down part of the side. Nevertheless, this rate is good indicator of the well-developed strategic communications of the company. Since CEO is still in the very center of communications and development of the company reputation, but strengthened with involvement of top management, key business heads, who can appear in media and can have direct influence on development of company reputation. I took example of our company because it is 5 years of development from scratch, and the results could be quite clear if we speak about start from no name, no brand, and results as of today. Nevertheless, once again, CEO still remains in the center of attention if you speak about corporate strategic communications and corporate communications. And CEO is supported by other key speakers for key developments and areas of communications. You can see here the CEO share of participation in, like examples, communications events, communications projects, I would say, company media presence, and brand development. Once again, why I took our company like case study, I think it is good example with clear time limits and clear results, confirmed today by Thomson Reuters, Delogic, Bloomberg, others. And nevertheless, 5 years ago, I can recall how we shared with CEO one office at the very start, at the temporary premises, before we moved to our new skyscraper office. And communications and marketing department that time, at the very start, when there was no share, once again, no communication share, no reputation still at the company because there was no business, started from scratch. Communications marketing department was sitting next door in the room with dark green wallpaper. We named cigar room, we joking that time. Probably 5 years ago, it was a good start also for creative and services and creativity of my team, which we use from time to time, promoting CEO and other C-suite pool of spokespersons of our company. And speaking about CEO involvement and correct strategic communication, the results could be also confirmed not only by league tables and world global trade houses, but also by headliners of key international media in all hubs the company dealing in, and all communications markets and all audiences the company is working for. Last but not least, I would like to say that promoting in our case, since I speak about our case study today, CEO and develop company reputation, in our case, is probably double, triple mission, because we speak about new market. And at the new market, it is very much important to also to work with stereotypes and all the issues could relate to the new market and the country development. Nevertheless, I think if the strategic communications are correct, mission is possible. And the very last thing. One US journalist, during our meeting in Moscow last week or the week before, said a very important thing, which is related directly to our topic today. He said, when I communicate, I do so with a person, not with their title. When I am interviewing someone, I may be speaking to them because of the position they hold, but I am still communicating with a person, an individual. CEOs are both influential leaders and individuals, and it is very much important to develop the role of CEO in corporate reputation and promotion of business and the company, supporting him as this CEO, this individual and influential leader, as well as working with him as a big value for the company reputation development? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start with the doctor. You think CEOs are taking their roles as reputation ambassadors seriously? Are they spending the required time and attention to this role?
I think there are many who do, but there's always room for improvement. I think it's important and fully supported by the research that you shared with us that everybody, including the CEO, him or herself, is aware that there's no way to delegate this task to anyone else than to live this and do this themselves. Yes, they need to surround themselves with people who can help them to navigate this and to manage this, but at the end of the day, whenever something happens, the public will look to the one with the highest paycheck and who sits on top of the organization, and then this person is better well equipped to deal with this. But also internally, they cannot fulfill their role as leaders to move the organization in the strategic direction they have defined if they can't win the people to follow them, and that is always, I think, only possible through effective communication. But what's important is that you never try a one-fit-all approach here, because back to your point, these are individuals with their own characteristics. They're not all naturally born communicators. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and I think the most important thing is that whatever you develop, it needs to be highly authentic for the person that you are working with, because otherwise it's impossible to build trust and also followership if people smell that this is not the real him or the real her in the way how they present themselves. So I think the research is fully supporting my experience. I was a little bit irritated or wondering when I saw that only 0.8% in the pharma industry CEOs are visible, and I just had an exchange with my CEO. Pierre is to an extent a pharma company, where he is going to give a speech about why there is not better reputation and more trust in the pharma industry. And I intuitively concluded, because there's no face to this industry, you have always these anonymous kind of corporations, and I encourage him to put his face on top of this, otherwise it will not be easy to win trust and confidence in what the company is doing.
HSBC operates in multiple geographies and multiple countries. If you take the role of a global CEO out and take country-level CEOs, are they increasingly getting aware and seized with reputation as an important aspect of their business in the many countries that they operate in?
I think it's a very good question. HSBC has always been deeply concerned with reputation because we're a bank, and a bank really doesn't have much going for it other than reputation. A bank is a collection of people these days, IT, and a few buildings, and a reputation. The products that we sell are highly commoditized. People often don't put banks in that category, but the fact is a checking account is a checking account, a foreign exchange transaction is a foreign exchange transaction, and a bond issue is a bond issue. So at every level of banking, it's highly commoditized. That means what you're selling is your reputation and a way of doing things. We take a very, what I would describe as a fine-grained approach. So we try and look at the world as a series of audiences, and then we use, whether it's the global CEO or the country CEO, we use the right people to reach the right audience. In the last few years, we've spent much more time trying to reach our own employees, because banking has been going through, obviously, a difficult period over the last 5 years. And we've tried to make much more use of the country CEOs to speak to clients. So there has been a shift over the last 3 to 5 years, certainly the last 3 years, the new management team coming in at HSBC. The country CEOs have become chief client officers in their countries. The global CEO, so the person I work for, actually spends most of his communications time, because there aren't enough hours in the day to do everything a CEO is supposed to do. Most of his communications time is spent trying to reach employees, because that is the way to set the tone for the rest of the organization. So if you think about how do you maintain and enhance a reputation over time, it's the style and the manner in which you communicate with all of your audiences. People look for instruction. Where do they find that instruction? They find it from the CEO. So our CEO has actually made it sort of a key part of his overall strategy, is to show to the organization how he thinks we should all be communicating with all of our audiences. And in our case, that's a very straightforward, matter-of-fact way of communicating. And we've made very deliberate choices, and it's, you know, how you use the CEO, or how the CEO chooses to communicate, really depends on circumstances. In our case, our CEO has not been on Bloomberg or CNBC because it wouldn't serve a purpose to personalize the bank, because actually banks have had far too much, at least the very big banks, have had far too much personality. And what we needed to prove to our regulators and our customers was that banks weren't actually run by a single individual, that they were robust institutions with strong management structures, and that wasn't one guy or one woman, for that matter, running an organization with 259,000 people. That's not really a sensible argument to try and make. So since the current CEO took over at the beginning of 2011, he's not done a single television interview. And I don't think that that will change. So, you know, Bloomberg and CNBC, they've got their business, we've got ours. We don't necessarily have to sort of feed their machine. We've got our own strategy for how we communicate with the people we're trying to reach.
It's not simply about communicating a story, it's also about, let's say, becoming a better company with a better story. So every decision, every initiative that a company takes, and more so in banking and financial institutions, given the kind of trust deficit that we have seen across the world, every judgment has to be previewed or passed through the prism of public opinion. How will it work? How will it pan out? That would require a certain amount of time commitment from CEOs. In your experience as CEOs, granting you that much time to discuss the public fallouts of any initiative or any decision that's taken. What would you say, Olga?
I think it is a matter of proactivity, first of all. To influence the situation, you should create it at the very start. We speaking these days a lot about stories, about difference or split of reality and PR communications. But I find the most effective thing is when you find the right way to promote your company with, of course, help of your CEO and his youth spokespersons, and to find the right communication way with your target audience, first of all. In our case, on the one hand, it is a little bit more difficult speaking about financial markets, but speaking about investment banking, because we are B2B, and our clients, no matter it is VTB Capital or other investment bankers, are top tier, including companies, names, and deals as well, actually. So why I mentioned Bloomberg, Delogic, Thomson Reuters, just ratings, technical things. Nevertheless, how to find the right way to the not hearts, I don't speak about personalities here, to the minds and perception of this audience. This is the most difficult question. What events, what communication things could touch them? Because the audience is very special, and the market is very well-developed communications market. So I would once again repeat that proactivity, right, including creative solution, could help very much.
What would you say, Dr. Heitmann? Do you get the amount of time that you expect them to give?
I've had different experiences. I had CEOs who were very eager that only their face was visible and as much as possible, and I had CEOs I worked with who I had always to convince that it's not sufficient that I tell the journalists that they have to do it, because only out of their mouths it has the kind of impact. What I found is that sometimes it helps to find out what's the root cause for the desire to be highly visible or hiding, and sometimes it's a level of comfort where simple training can make a huge difference, and sometimes it's just understanding that this is, as you also pointed out, not an ego show, this is a corporation that has to be represented and should not be only identified with one person, but I think it's a case-by-case choice. It's always a balance, and I think best is if you create opportunistic opportunities around business that is usually the prime driver for travel, for activities, and only have a few selected things where you say this is now a must for reputation purposes, but don't overdo, because It's much easier to convince why a business is needed where a real dollar figure stands behind than if you deal with these theses that reputation will benefit from this engagement.
I deal with, let's say, public sector clients away from private sector. Most of you are from private sector. You worked with the government earlier. Now, you come across a situation where you have a tenure of a chairman for 5 years, and there's one guy who wants to be in the newspaper every day of those 5 years. And it's followed by a guy who doesn't want to come into a newspaper even one day in the next 5 years. So some people have a natural propensity for communication, and some are naturally would rather not communicate. What is the best solution? Would you let him take a back seat, or how do you deal with such situations?
I think when you manage transitions, that's indeed one of the key tasks to have this smooth transition. And well, it's very simple. You have to lower the visibility of the one and carefully build up the visibility of the other, and both have at the same level. That's easier said than done, but I don't have a better solution than to maintain a rather steady visibility, because otherwise the story is more about this change in visibility than the messages that you want to bring across.
Are boards, taking off from this point, are boards increasingly conscious of this requirement of a CEO, that he has to be a good communicator? So when you hire new CEOs, is that an important thing to evaluate in the candidate before you take him on board?
I think it's becoming ever more important. So I think having a well-rounded set of communication skills to reach all the audiences that are relevant to your company is almost becoming mandatory. And I think we've all seen examples at companies where there might have been someone who is a technical expert but a poor communicator who didn't do very well. We've seen examples of people who are sort of, purely a salesperson, but couldn't translate selling into something that was a broader set of communications skills. So I think it's becoming absolutely essential. Because again, to come back to this idea, you have many different audiences you need to reach. The CEO is critical in reaching each one of those audiences. We haven't touched on shareholders and investors, but you've got the big set-piece events like annual meetings and results announcements, but you also have to use your CEO to meet one-on-one with your major investors. If you're a listed company, this is critically important to how the company runs. If you don't have the confidence of your big investors, you don't have a shareholder base that will support you when times get tough. If you look at what I can see as best practice in large companies at least, a CEO is probably spending 1/3 of his or her time communicating in one form or another.
And which is the constituency he focuses on the most, or he should rather focus on most?
It's what I was saying before. It depends very much on the circumstances, but I think you can easily see there's a customer audience, there is a broad public audience, there's an investor audience, there's an employee audience. There isn't just one important constituency.
What about regulatory and government?
And there's absolutely there's the regulators and
in emerging markets
and the public area, public policy
markets with
areas.
complex environments, regulation and government would be taking a lot of time.
Banking, it's taking up at least a third of our time.
Olga, in VTB Capital, most of the country CEOs, are they Russians everywhere, or do you hire various other nationalities?
No. We have Russian CEO, just global CEO, as well as the founder of VTB Capital, who is now first deputy chairman of the group. And all other CEOs are multinational. We have Arabian CEO in MENA, for example. We have Chinese CEO. There are 2 in Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore. We have Bulgarian CEO, but with 25 track records in UK market in London, and we have American in US, in New York. I stop here. No, I missed Balkan, Italian colleague is responsible for Eastern Europe market development and so forth. We are multinational.
I have an observation. In India, we have, a lot of foreign direct investment has come in, and many companies from many countries have come in. Of course, Germans have been there for a very long time. Now, I find that CEOs from an Anglo-Saxon kind of background or tradition are more visible, they communicate more easily, whereas you have CEOs from, let's say, Japan, or Japanese expat CEOs working in India, or the Koreans, or the Chinese, maybe some Eastern European or Central European countries who are not as communicative. Is that a cultural issue? Is that a rather risk aversion, or is it from the background? What must be bringing about these differences?
Well, I think there are two factors. It's culture and language. I think I can imagine that since English is the dominating business language, regardless in which market you operate, those who can operate in their mother tongue are naturally more fluent communicators than those who use this as a learned language. But there are also cultural differences. I want to go back for a second to the previous discussion, because I also had an observation. So if you look, successful companies always have one successful founder or a group of founders, and then many successful CEOs. The founders are always also very good communicators of the successful companies. The subsequent CEOs, you might see changes, but it's interesting to see what kind of portfolio does a founder bring to the table. But obviously, good, strong communication skills seem to be part of successful founders. Which proves the point that the selection of the next CEO for a company should certainly also be done under consideration of the communication skills of that person.
One more question. In emerging markets particularly, the environmental complexity is very, very high. In India, I see in the last 1 year, maybe 20 different multinational corporations have had serious reputation issues with compliance, with supply chain issues. CEO indiscretion has done something which has not gone well with the public. How do you prepare these CEOs to deal with these kind of reputation risks?
Just good old-fashioned hard work. Preparation, preparation, preparation. There's no other. I mean, there's two sorts of crises. There's the one that you know it's coming and you have time to prepare, and we've probably all been through those. And then there's the crisis that hits you without any warning whatsoever. And the only way to deal with that effectively is to prepare. So that the CEO needs to already be a skilled communicator. And if it's a brand new CEO or someone who doesn't have the communication skills, day 2 of their new CEO-ship needs to be communications training, because Herbert's absolutely right. When something goes spectacularly wrong, people need to hear from the CEO. So that's critical. And I think it's it's just having all of the systems and responses in place to deal with whatever crisis arises. I think there may have been a lot of action in India, but frankly, the world we live in today, there's lots of action everywhere. The one thing that has changed, I think, dramatically, and it's been discussed a lot at this conference, is just social has been discussed a lot at this conference, but people haven't really discussed the impact. What does that really mean? Nothing is private anymore. This conversation isn't private. That has fundamentally changed how corporate life actually runs. So there is nothing that is secret for even a minute. And if there's anything at all exciting in an email, it's forwarded outside the organization. I think we're moving to a world where actually this sense that there's always something coming up that we need to talk about and explain is just going to become normal. And I don't know how long ago this was. I was a journalist for a long time as well. There were certainly large companies who communicated 4 times a year with the quarterly results, and that was it. And nobody bothered them the rest of the time. And there might be once a year the CEO would do an interview with with the local financial newspaper, and that was it, they were done. I don't think that is even possible anymore.
Olga, what would you say on this?
I would like to add that communications is equal to risk management if it is proper and correct communications. And I completely agree with colleague that the system of communications within the company or big corporation is probably not 100, but 90%, yes, ensure the proper results. So it is not just policies, procedures, the platform or system you mentioned before. Nevertheless, it is crucial and important, yes, for the start, the platform. But it is also relationship. Relationship you develop with your spokespersons, incorporating them in the system and providing them to the audience, either with comments or with direct interviews. And if your relationship within the platform and system are well developed, it is already a chance that you can manage in proper way and with good results, crisis issues and any communications issues.
I think we should have some participation from the audience. Is there any perspective you would like to share or discuss or ask any questions to the panel? Yes, please. You have been a very vocal questioner in most of the panels.
I'm curious. I took a day off yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a frivolous question, but I think an important one. I'd love to know from each of the panelists which CEO you think has been sort of the best communicator and why, and you're not all allowed to say Steve Jobs.
That's a tough one, because by what standard do you want to judge what is the best communicator? I think at the end of the day, those who manage to keep the gap between what the company stands for and what the public thinks about us keeps it the closest. But that is in some cases easier than in others. So I struggle with a fair answer. Certainly, I always tried hard to help the CEO that I was working with to belong to the better ones, but I would never go as far to say that they were the best. So,
yeah, I don't think I could single out an individual, but I'll single out a style and explain why I think it's the right style. I think a CEO who can communicate in a way that appears genuinely natural is the CEO to admire as a communicator. I think some CEOs, and you can sort of see examples in lots of countries and in lots of industries, have listened to the wrong advice and try and present themselves in a way that just looks awkward and doesn't somehow, it's just not them. And that never works. So whoever you are as an individual, if you're a CEO, you need to build on your own personality, your own strengths, and develop a communication style that comes across in a genuine and honest way. And I'll just tell briefly a very short story, and I won't say which company or where, but I lived in Hong Kong for a long time, and there were lots of people giving lots of advice to CEOs in Hong Kong about how to present themselves. And there was a trend for a while for people to do these sort of razzle-dazzle American-style presentations in town halls. And most of the time, they were disasters because the people doing these presentations didn't have the experience, hadn't attended 100 similar events, and just came on stage without their ties or without the natural props of being a CEO in that context, came on stage and just looked so out of sorts, like a fish out of the sea, that it just didn't work. So I think that the critical thing is, be who you are, bring all of that to the stage or the platform that you're occupying, and communicate to the very best of your abilities and use your strengths rather than trying to be something else.
You want to add something?
Just to add that definitely CEO is the real task force for communication, and he must be the great communicator. But answering your question, it is probably a dream all of us to have the CEO in the due time, at the right place. All times we need him or her for communication with proper message. And I would say that additional bonus or value from CEO is when CEO is involved in direct communications with target audience and is ready for creative solutions. Sorry for that. It is some area of risk, but it is an area of risk which ensure development of communications and ensure some new solution. Our example is we have annual huge investment event in the market, and when CEO is ready during the evening event to be at the stage in the uniform, I mean not direct meaning, and play some game with the audience who are biggest international investors, biggest Russian company, the clients, and speak with them one language in during this particular evening, it is already great win, I would say, for communications.
Please.
My question is involved CEOs and social media. Is it always a good idea to push them to get involved? Is it not? I'd just love to hear your opinion or thoughts on that.
Good question.
Yeah, and one that seems to be a red thread through the whole event here. I heard yesterday similar discussions, and I therefore, to an extent, repeat myself. I think, again, if it's their nature to use these kind of things, absolutely, no reason not to do this. But if they would never touch a Facebook account or a Twitter only because they are the CEO, I would say absolutely not. Because these kind of things, more than anything else, live from the authenticity of the content and the behavior and the communication style. So I've seen a couple of cases where advisors said you should have a blog because that makes you look more innovative and modern, and then a speechwriter wrote this blog and they were wondering why only a couple of hundred people followed the blog of the CEO when you have 100,000 employees. That's a strong indicator that people smell when this is not the real one, and then you better don't do it at all. But I think it has an opportunity, particularly I think Twitter feeds, to bring the persona better across, so that people, because these I agree with you, these Bloomberg interviews, they are so stereotypic, it's very difficult to get the character of the CEO out of these kind of things. But in a Twitter feed, you find more about who he or she is and what they value and how they behave. So I think it has clearly merits if it is something that the person naturally wants to do.
It has to be not forced. And there are different ways of achieving the same end. So the CEO I work for is not going to tweet. But what he does do, when he travels around, he always does some sort of meeting with employees. And he does it without ceremony. There's no introduction. There's no song and dance routine. There isn't every local chief doing a 5-minute introduction explaining how important they are to the future of humanity and the company. It's just the CEO just stands up and talks for 10 minutes and takes questions. Everybody who attends those events then talks about them. So good old-fashioned word of mouth is what we used to call social, and it still works. So everybody within our company knows that when the CEO travels around, he's accessible, he's approachable, and you can ask him any question and nobody gets shot. And that message has spread very widely and is well understood by our entire population of 259,000 people. You could have achieved the same end with a Twitter account, but it didn't suit him. He likes to meet people face to face, so that's what he does.
Taking off from that question, it may not be, let's say, so critical for him to be on Twitter or Facebook if you were in an industry like chemicals or pharmaceuticals. But if you had a constituency which was much more youthful, much more younger as your customers, or if you were a software services company where you have 200,000 people around the world, mostly below 30 years of age, then it would become a more of a job requirement.
So I would say that it depends on business of a company and on issues the company should or shouldn't solve in the public area.
We'll take one more question before we wrap up the session.
Thank you. Well, it looks like all three panelists today are trying to be as much diplomatic as possible, and I do appreciate this, but I'll try to ask probably more, how to say, provocative question, if you don't mind. My personal experience was the following, that sometimes I saw the PR directors of the companies with whom we worked, I represent the agency, they were suffering from the situation when they were preparing, as you say, just usually they all try to do their best. But unfortunately, sometimes it failed for some personal reasons or for some organizational reasons. So my question will be rather provocative to you, rather personal. Did you feel in your personal career, in your practice, a real disappointment when, for example, you were preparing something really serious in your matter and at the very last moment it was failing due to some reasons? Just if you give any example, if it is possible, would be great.
No, of course, I think this is how you learn. But I think what's important in this job, different to probably many other jobs, is that you need to get the CEO to know, earn his trust, use it, push back when pushback is needed, and when you can't do this anymore, then also leave that seat. Because otherwise it's not going to work. And that's not the case if you are the chief marketing officer or the chief sales officer. There you have a different relationship with your boss than in this particular case, where it's also your job to protect his or her reputation. And that is different than if you just take orders and execute them and report back the results. So, yeah, I think, I'm sure we all go through these experiences, but it should not be the standard, rather the exception.
I haven't suffered any fatal incidents, so I don't really have anything to add to Herbert's comments. I think I still believe in this sort of golden rule. It's far better to try 10 things knowing that one won't work than to be so risk averse that you only ever do 3 things. Because then you're missing out on all of the things you could have done. So there will be some things that don't work. As long as you catch them before they really hurt you, I think that's fine. You have to keep pushing. Yeah, not everything works. That's just the price of progress.
So thank you very much. Been a great panel and a great audience. So thank you very much. Thank you.